welcome back to another episode of Talking Tents, a RaceBot TV podcast. Thank you for joining us live across RaceBot social media or through the audio version released the very same day on a podcast app of your preference. As always, my name is Arjuna Kankipati. I'm joined by veteran esports commentator Connery Maddock with Hugo Luis down in the production booth controlling the action. And Connery, before we get started, you just wrapped up the DTM Esports Series. You were commentating that alongside Actual Vision Luke Crane. Very exciting. And I think we usually talk about iRacing here on the podcast, but that's a series with a lot of intrigue and a very interesting broadcast to be able to take part in.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, like you said, I mainly do iRacing stuff. Of course, we mostly here at RaceBot do iRacing stuff, but it's good to take a trip into other sims and see what's going on there. And that's what I'd like to do with the podcast as well. So watch out for maybe the next episode where we start to explore a little bit of more non-iRacing sort of situations and maybe get Moritz Lohner, the winner of the DTM Esports Championship, on the broadcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Drives for Williams Esports, won DTM the Esports Super Cup. He also competes in various iRacing competitions once in a while, so hopefully we'll get Moritz on the podcast in the future. But let's dive straight into it. We've got a great guest coming up later today. Beau Albert competes in the iRacing World Rallycross Championship presented by Yokohama Drives for Andretti Autosport and Logitech G Altus Esports on the sim racing side of things. That'll be an interesting discussion. But let's get started by talking about an event that's just about to kick off. And in the immortal words of Randy Chenoweth, the month of May comes to November as the Open Wheels 500 returns for its second edition. The unofficial Indy 500 put on by the Open Wheels sanctioning body and Tanner Watkins brought in over 100 competitors last time around, but this year back and bigger than ever before, Connery. And this is one of those events that tries to elevate it above what a regular sim racing event would try and do. We think of the iRacing Indy 500 that takes place in May. That's in many ways just a regular event. You've got the 1 week of qualifying that leads up to the race, but here with the Open Wheels 500, 2 full weeks of scheduled competition, and it all kicks off this coming week with practice and the qualifying draw before we've got qualifying on the 7th and 8th of November.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's shaping up to be an absolutely awesome competition. Of course, a lot of drivers consider it the same difficulty, if not even harder, to try and get into than the top split of the iRacing Indianapolis 500. Of course, it's great to see these sort of leagues with more oversight actually trying to take on these sorts of special events as well. I would like to see that more in terms of iRacing's involvement in the special event side of things, because, the Indy 500 is probably one of the events they have the most hand in because they have to set up the custom qualifying sessions. But as far as the other iRacing special events are concerned, they just kind of just set up the servers and just fingers crossed everything stays stable throughout all of it. So, yeah, I mean, iRacing could probably learn from, some of the other private leagues and private sanctioning bodies when it comes to running these sorts of big events.
And let's just run through some numbers for you. Like I say, sim racing event that takes place over 2 weeks to try and provide a motorsport event that honors the Indy 500 that happens in each May, incorporating as many elements and traditions that occur that often are lacking from the Indy 500. We're looking at 14 days of racing, like I talked about. Practice kicking off November 1st, qualifying the 7th and 8th. 33 drivers will make it through out of the 110 that have signed up and registered. We've got Veterans Day qualifying Friday, November 13th. So we're going to have a shorter race run in the Dallara DW12 chassis with running a little bit less power, a little bit of a weight penalty as well. That should produce some fun racing. The very next day, November 14th, we've got the day before the 500 with the actual Veterans 100 race alongside a pit stop competition. And then it all leads up to the big race itself. 15th of November, some surprises in store that we're not going to talk about too much here on the podcast. You'll have to tune in to the iRacing Esports Network and RaceBot TV for that. But talking off some of the numbers, we're talking about 14 winners of an official iRacing Indy 500 on the entry list, 4 more than last year. Talking about 50 drivers with top split experience in the Indy 500. You also have, for the first time, Connery, an interesting choice here. As part of an association with the engine providers, Open Wheels has been able to partner with both Chevy and Honda to allow teams to represent a specific engine manufacturer. And even though the performance on the track isn't necessarily going to be different depending on your choices, we're looking at 58 drivers who have picked the Chevy versus 52 picking that Honda-powered engine.
Yeah, it makes sense to have a near 50-50 split considering there's no advantage for going with one engine provider over the other. Only one is modelled as far as iRacing is concerned. But it's great to see that even some, private organizations are getting support from engine manufacturers, for example. It's brilliant to see, and to have that sort of support will really, really help them out. And hopefully it's a sign of things to come.
Absolutely. And, we're talking about an Indy 500, which in many ways is a very US-based competition and a spectacle, if you will. But last year, the top 3 finishers were all from Europe, so representing yourself, Connery. But talking about 69 drivers from the US versus 41 international competitors this year. So that's up in terms of your split. You had 70 versus 34 last year. So an increase in your international competition. And like we say, extensive coverage coming on RaceSpot TV. We're looking at 10 hours of complete coverage. It kicks off with the qualifying draw the Thursday before qualifying. We've got 2 one-hour broadcasts on qualifying, both on Saturday and Sunday of that week. We've also got coverage of the Veterans 100 qualifying alongside the day before the 500 and the main race coverage. So lots of action to look forward to on RaceSpot TV. And like I say, that will be very interesting. But let's move onto the endurance side of things, Connery, because we're now getting into November. It's getting down below 10 degrees Celsius in the Bay Area. Finally have to put shoes on to go walk my dog. And well, that means endurance season is well and truly among us now. And SCO round number 2 is coming up quickly this coming weekend. You'll be on the call for that. But we also had the 24-hour esports powered by Neo Endurance that took place the first round last weekend. And a big event. You had Radio Show Limited partnering with RaceSpot TV to bring coverage of that. And your winners there, MSI Esports taking home the win in GT3, the Inertia Sim Racing team in 911 Cup, as well as SRC Squadra Corsa in GT4 and SimRC in TCR. So some big competitors in both of these series and lots of endurance action on RaceSpot TV to be able to watch.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the second round of SEO, especially considering that it does have quite the complement of teams, shall we say. Some of the top teams on iRacing making their appearance once again in SEO after a pretty interesting first round. Of course, you got Race Clutch currently leading the Prototype Championship at the moment, which is not what I would have expected coming into this season. Fantastic win for them in the first round of the season, but whether or not they'll be able to hold that momentum through the entirety of the 7 rounds still remains to be seen. GT, of course, similarly competitive. BS Plus Competition leading in that order right now, and in GTC you also have Pure Sims Esports grabbing the win in the previous round as well. Going up against the likes of Vendaval, NX, SimRC, so pretty tough competition in that class as well. So it seems to be so competitive, and at this early stage, there's no telling how this season will turn out.
Yeah, and 3 first-time winners in SEO competition as well. So you mentioned not maybe expecting the Race Clutch team to be leading the championship, but for Enric, Andre, and their team owner, Richard Arnault, some monster stints in that 12 hours of Sebring. They only changed drivers twice in that race, if you can believe it, which is absolutely insane. But we head from a 12-hour race down to just 4 hours, and 4 hours this time, Connery, at Monza, which, if we're being honest, with the type of traffic that we saw at Sebring, it will produce a lot of exciting chaos. And, I think about the first time when traffic's going to come around and potentially all 3 classes are intermingling. It's going to be crazy. And SEO has always got some of the most entertaining traffic battles that we can watch on the iRacing Esports Network.
Yeah, Monza is going to be very, very interesting because, of course, at first look, you say, okay, we've got very long straights. We should, traffic should be easier to deal with it there. But, if you catch them in the wrong places, like through Lesmos, like through the Ascari chicane, then there's not a lot that you can do as a faster class. You're just going to have to stick behind and just wait for one of those straight bits of road. And it does tend to create a little bit of chaos at times with these endurance events at Monza, but with the drivers of this caliber, it should be a slightly reduced problem. But again, it's going to be kind of like Road Atlanta, where traffic management is going to be the name of the game as far as this one's concerned.
Yeah, no, the top class in the field this time, no longer the LMP1, so no boosting going to be taking a place around the track. That might make traffic that much more difficult. But talking about GTE for a second, Connery, we talk about that class being dominated by the BMW M8. Some recent updates to BOP in that class, 9 horsepower being removed from the M8's engine, it now brings up this interesting possibility of the Corvette, which the two Williams teams have elected to enter, the only two Corvettes in the field, maybe start to be a little bit stronger throughout the rest of this competition. And while Monza might not be the best track for the Corvette, given how much of the curbs you need to take to really minimize the distance that you travel, it is going to start shaking up the order a little bit more. Like we say, 7 rounds. This is the longest SCO season that we've ever had, and these BOP changes, especially in GTE, are going to be something the teams have to keep on top of.
Yeah, absolutely. The Corvette, the Williams Corvette's going to get a decent boost coming into Monza. BMW is going to struggle a little bit, but given most of the fuel is BMWs, it kind of just equals out between all of them. But yeah, for those drivers and teams that have not picked the BMW, they're going to possibly find some decent results at Monza, but we'll just have to wait and see. Of course, a lot of the strong teams still in BMWs, and if you have a pretty strong driver lineup, then you can sort of offset some of the disadvantage that the BOP gives you. But it does mean that things might be a little bit more competitive towards the front. We'll see a couple of teams that were in the mid-pack in round 1 actually sort of rise to the occasion, get themselves inside the top couple of spots. And with it being a very short race as well, there's not a lot of room to work with in terms of being creative on the strategy as well. So it's it's going to be very qualifying dependent, I feel, very track position dependent, very traffic dependent, and it's going to be pretty intriguing as a result.
And with open qualifying, I think drafting during qualifying, it might end up looking a little bit like an F1 qualifying session. That will yet to be determined. But Connor, you'll be producing and commentating that one. Should be a busy one for you. I'm sure you're looking forward to it. But at the same time, 5 hours of that kind of action should be a fairly tiring day for you.
Yeah, I usually describe trying to produce and commentate at the same time as either opening up Task Manager in your brain and just seeing it pegged at 100% the entire time, because it's just, it does wear you out, but I'm certainly ready for it. Of course, we have David Haynes as co-commentator on that one as well. Should be absolutely fantastic broadcast. Of course, we have the Spanish broadcast as well for the Spanish viewers, and of course parts of Latin America where that language is prevalent, so they'll be able to watch in their native language, which is absolutely brilliant, which is what I want to see more of when it comes to sim racing. Not just 2 languages, English and Spanish, English and German, as it turns out for a lot of the DTM stuff. Just want to see a lot more language broadcast partners come in and commentate in their native language, because not everyone is most comfortable with English, and to have that option available to viewers is going to be so beneficial going forward. So hopefully we get a lot more of that.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what we can do as a sim racing community to continue growing the sport with Beau in just a few moments' time. But I think it's interesting you say that, because that coverage, I believe, presented by Radicals Online, and it really affirms all the work that SCO has been doing, right? That so much intrigue and so many people want to watch these series, and all the competitors out on track. It's great to have so many eyes on the series. And like you say, with this additional, audience that are now coming in and able to more closely connect and identify with the teams, it should just bring more attention to the entire series as a whole.
Yeah, it sort of goes to that point of you want to humanize the drivers, you want to humanize the teams, you want to say why this is important, you want to build that storyline over the course of a season, and if that's easier in different languages for different people to understand, then that's just better. That's just flat out better. So, we're already seeing a lot of it in other esports. I believe League of Legends has an insane amount of languages broadcasting their World Championship across the globe. Similarly so with a lot of the Counter-Strike stuff. So it's it's something that other esports have already done, and I hope that sim racing continues along that path, because the more people we get involved in this, more people that can see the broadcast and understand the broadcast, the better.
Absolutely. And sim racing and all broadcasting is about telling a story. So when you're able to connect that much more with what is being told, it will help benefit the sport immensely. And that's a good segue, I think, Connery, to then bring in our guest for today and talk a little bit about his background in sim racing as well. So Beau Albert, competitor for Logitech G Altus Esports and Andretti Autosport in the iRacing Rallycross World Championship presented by Yokohama. And Beau competes for Andretti in that series. He's running in the Volkswagen Beetle, which some of the competitors in that series call it in the Formula 1.5 class, if you will. But Beau, delighted to have you here. 4 races into this World Championship season. It's been an interesting one so far, and 5 races still to go. How's it been going for you as you continue your way through the season?
It's been a tricky one for sure, of course, being in the Volkswagen. We're always qualifying on the back foot, so it's been a struggle, but I've been doing my best to get the bug up the order, and thankfully, for those that don't know, it's not really too public yet, but we do actually have a rule change going into the next 5 rounds, so hopefully we're a little bit more competitive, and we can fight for 5th in the championship. So currently the highest placed Volkswagen, but that's not enough. I'm going to try and go a few places better in the last few rounds, but it's going to be super tough. We've got some very difficult tracks coming up for the good old bug.
And it's not just that you're in a car that's maybe been struggling a little bit in terms of overall performance. The one thing that I noticed in this World Championship Series is just how close everyone up and down the field are. And you're talking about, once again, it's the case in all World Championship Series, but qualifying becomes so important to put yourself in a good position for the heat races, because if you're out of position in the heats, then you get out of position in the last chance qualifiers, and it all spirals out of control. So let's talk a little bit about qualifying for you specifically before we get into some of your background as well in this World Championship. How important has that been for you? You talk about being at a bit of a disadvantage. What are some of the things that you have been able to do to try and reap back some of the performance there?
It's a very tricky thing. So for those that don't understand why the Volkswagen and the Ford Fiesta that's included as well might not be up to the same par in qualifying as the Subaru, it's down to the wheelbases of the car. The Subaru is much longer, and therefore on a completely fresh track, when the dirt's all freshly paved and there's nothing in terms of tarmac appearing on the track surface, we've just got a little bit less traction in the dirt, which means we're just a little bit slower. So in terms of what we can do, there's honestly not too much. We can try and tune our setups, our differentials in particular, to really try and maximize our traction and really focus on that. But it's a never-ending battle. So I think the highest qualifying effort for a Volkswagen this season was 8th place at Daytona, and you don't get qualifying points for 8th place. So still no Volkswagens or Fords have scored qualifying points, which is a big struggle. So yeah, there's not much we can do. And like you say, it's tricky because not only are the heats so short, but like you say, there's only 2 places in those heats to get into the final as well. So for the most part, us Volkswagens have been going through the last chance qualifiers, and only one person makes it out of there. So it's a slugfest. Everyone's getting into each other's doors a little bit there, but it's just what it is. And hopefully the new rule change for round 5 helps us out.
And before we get into talking about the rule change, you mentioned it there. One of the reasons why qualifying is so important in this series, 6 points available for the fastest qualifying time in an event where there's 29 points on offer for, taking a clean sweep of the weekend, if you will. 6 points can really change the entire story. And right now, John Robertson, who's at the front of the standings, he's been benefited by those qualifying points. So before you just explain for our viewers what this rule change is going to do, we should emphasize just how important getting the fastest lap in qualifying is, not just for your grid positioning, but also just for the points as well.
Absolutely, and that's one thing I do like that they've changed for this season of the WCS is we can score points in a lot of other ways. In previous seasons, it was very much biased towards making the feature race. If you didn't make the feature, your championship was almost finished. But now there's more ways to score points, and qualifying points is one of those ways. But for us in the Volkswagen, like you say, 6 points is a lot, and not a single Volkswagen or Ford has scored a single point all season. So for us, we are hurting a little bit in the championship, and I've got no doubt that it plays a little bit into why we've got no Volkswagens inside the top 5 in the championship, because I think we do have the driver talent in the car to actually be that high in the championship. But when you're losing 6 points before your first heat race even begins, it's a big loss. And I think for me in the championship, if I had scored just 6 points in total over the 4 rounds we've had so far in qualifying, I think I'd be 5th in the championship or much closer to that. So it shows that every point does matter. And for us, it does feel a bit hard done by to not be able to score those points.
Yeah, you'd go from 10th, where you stand right now, up into 7th, I do believe, just with 6 points across 4 races in qualifying. So that would be a big shift indeed. But you mentioned the rule change coming in. We're looking at some changes to the track reset. Can you kind of break it down, because the way you broke down the differences in the cars and why that makes a difference was really great to be able to understand. I think it really makes it easier for someone new to rallycross racing to understand why these rule changes are going to have such a big effect.
Absolutely. So basically how the World Championship worked beforehand was we would have a track reset but for qualifying. So we would do all our laps in practice as we would, and as cars drive over the surface, of course, we're sliding, we're kicking up the dirt out the back of the car, dust flying everywhere. It looks really cool, but it's also clearing the track, so there's actually less dirt on the surface of the on the circuit. So with that basically means we're getting closer to the tarmac underneath the track, and then we actually have more grip. We're slightly speeded up. With the loose dirt, the Subaru has the advantage, so on a completely fresh track, that has the advantage. So when we go from practice into qualifying, the track's reset. Out of nowhere, all the dirt is back on the racing line and the Volkswagen's at a disadvantage. So what they're going to be doing from round 5 onwards is no one's actually going to be allowed on the track for the first 15 minutes of practice. So the first 15 minutes of practice, don't bother watching. It's going to be not too spectacular. We're going to be just going around the crowds and interviewing some people maybe. But then 5 minutes before qualifying starts, everyone's allowed onto the track. We can wear the track down, get some of that fresh dirt off the racing line, and then that gets carried into qualifying. So no longer are we going into qualifying with an entirely fresh track with dirt on the racing line. Now we actually have some of that taken off, and what that means is the Volkswagens, with their much shorter wheelbase, actually have some chance of traction. So I think what you're going to see with this rule change, I'm not saying you're going to see a Volkswagen on pole by any stretch. John Robertson, Johan Harth, Mitchell de Jong, Jon Olakainen, they're talent. That's plain and simple. It's not the cars giving them the lap time, they're talent. So you're still going to see them at the front of the order. You're not going to see massive chops and changes here and there. But the ability for those drivers in the Volkswagens and the Ford just grows massively, and you're going to see them at least able to fight for points now and have the opportunity to go for pole where they perhaps didn't before.
And let's talk a little bit more about your now working with the Andretti Autosport team, because part of this World Championship Series was a change to the draft style system that we've seen in NASCAR, where sim racers were able to partner with these real world organizations. And throughout this qualifying process for the World Championship, Beau, you were in this 13-week qualifier going across all types of cars. I think you competed at the Subaru at some tracks, the Beetle at some tracks, the Fiesta at other tracks, but you now for the World Championship had to pick one car. There was a slight BOP change coming out of the pro qualifiers. We didn't see the Subaru being an overly popular car in the qualifying series, but now in this full-featured World Championship Series, the Subaru has been the car of choice, and I think this will just hopefully, at the very least, like you say, bring the Beetle drivers a little bit closer in terms of qualifying. It's not going to help you guys that much at the end of the day, like you say, but all the drivers have talent, and that just is going to even up the playing field that little bit more.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it is. We're not, from the Volkswagen and Ford side, we're not looking for an advantage. We're looking for an even playing field, and I believe that's what we've got now. You know, some people say maybe it's too far in our direction now. Of course, we'll see how the next round at Lunkbarn actually pans out, and if we are too competitive or not. And obviously, Tyler and Chris and the rest of the team can adjust that. But yeah, so in the pro qualifying series, I was someone who showed no loyalty whatsoever. There was a 5-round period in the middle of the pro qualifying series where every week I was in a different car. So I was in a Ford 1 week, VW, Subaru, then I went back to a Ford, then a VW, and then I don't know what I was doing, but I was getting plenty of experience in all the options, so to say. But yeah, then of course we weren't given all too much information about how the World Championship was going. We got the invitation to say, hey, you're through to the World Championship. And in that, it was basically, we had to agree to basically not drive for our regular sim racing team, so for me, Altus Esports, and join up with a real world organization. And it's a topic for a bit later. I've got some thoughts on it. But yeah, basically from that list, there was one team in particular that really stood out to me, and that was Andretti Autosport. And the draft period started. No one was telling anyone who anyone was driving for. We all kept it very, very hush-hush. But after a few days, I hadn't received any information. So I gave Chris a little nudge. I'm like, hey, Chris, can you speak to Andretti for me? And they managed to get in touch with me. and we all started from there. And Andretti was a big one for me because in Australia, we don't have any rallycross culture at all. It's something that's not very well seen at all. We have a championship in Australia here. I think it has 8 cars. It's just not something that's supported in Australia. So I always used to watch the Global Rallycross Championship and the YouTube highlights and that. And at the time, it was Andretti Autosport just dominating with Scott Speed and Tanner Faust. So when I eventually got the contract in front of me to assign with Andretti, it was massive for me because that is the team that, for me, watching Rallycross was the dominant force. So to be a part of their squad for the World Championship was massive. And it's something that's really helped me sort of put my best foot forward to think I'm not just representing myself here, but an organization like Andretti, which is just massive.
And I'm sure it's not just the fact you're driving for Andretti. You're driving the Beetle, which Andretti was famous for campaigning in their rallycross days as well. And I'm sure working with a lot of that team, I know Graham Quinn, who was part of that rallycross program, is part of the esports organization as well. So there must be a lot of pride. And I saw a tweet from you this past weekend where you stayed up to watch the IndyCar race as well, supporting the real drivers there as well. So I think, like you say, it's great to see some of these organizations coming in, and drivers like yourself who have grown up with some of these names and maybe not ever really thought that you have the opportunity to represent them in a racing capacity, to be able to do that at the very top level of sim racing.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. For me, sadly, there was never any chance of a real-world career. It just never even slightly came to fruition. So for me, driving for Andretti Autosport was just, forget it. It's not happening. But then obviously series like this, it does give you the opportunity to link up with that. One of my teammates at Altus Esports, he's a massive Penske fan and now races for them in the Supercars E Series. So it is something that's changing in the sim racing world, in the respect that now we are able to develop those relationships with these teams, and it gives us opportunities we never had before, which is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, being able to represent Andretti is mega. And like you say, so in pro qualifying, I used the Volkswagen for most of the rounds, for a majority of it at least. And on the steering wheel of the Volkswagen, of course, I'm driving for Altus in the pro qualifying series. On the steering wheel, it has Andretti Autosport on it because they ran the cars. So even when I wasn't representing Andretti, I was still in an Andretti car. They run the Beetle, and they were famous for it. So to eventually get caught up to what is in essence the factory team for Volkswagen was incredible, basically. So super proud, very, very cool to be in an Andretti livery, have an Andretti logo on the steering wheel, get to wear an Andretti shirt in the World Championship. Yeah, it's crazy.
So you mentioned it, then let's dive a little bit more into your background, because you said not really much chance of ever making motorsports a career, if you're going to put it that way. And I think that's something that a lot of people who get into sim racing can agree on. They can, they feel similar emotions. It's a very expensive sport. Even karting at a very young age can be cost prohibitive for people to enter. What was your first entry point into sim racing? I know you've been doing it for a while now, and you've been doing iRacing specifically for a while, but do you remember the first time you saw a racing game and thought that was what you wanted to have some fun with?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an odd one because for so long, obviously everyone knows Australia is fantastic for their internet. I didn't have internet at my home, so it wasn't until I was, would have been about 14 years old or so, that I even had internet at the house. So I didn't even know about sim racing as a competition for so long. And eventually I just met up with some friends and on Formula 1 2013. And it was just this very small-time league that we ran in. It was nothing brilliant at all. There was no broadcast. It wasn't the most competitive series by any stretch of the imagination, but I loved it. It absolutely drew me in. Every week I was practicing for it. And that was my real entry point, was on there. And then eventually, one of my good friends there, Jono Stankowski, sort of recommended me another league, and I went off and raced Gran Turismo for quite a few years, and I was a part of a series that was had 150 drivers in it and had a lot of the GT Academy drivers, which of course was a competition run by Nissan quite a while back. And I was able to be competitive with them, and that sort of got me thinking that maybe, just maybe, I'm not too bad at sim racing. Maybe there's opportunities for me down the line. So From that point, I sort of started investing more in sim racing. In 2017, I got my first gaming PC and got iRacing. So that was the sim I loved. I watched all the broadcasts up to that point, and it was around that time where Gregor Hutu and Mitchell de Jong were in the iRacing Grand Prix series, and it was just fantastic to watch them. And that's sort of what really kicked me to go, I want to drive in a World Championship Series one day on iRacing. And yeah, I started sim racing. I managed to get into some contact with some good people pretty early. So at the time, Simon Feigl and Brenton O'Brien were managers at Evolution Racing Team, who was at the time probably one of the second or third biggest teams in Australia. And I got in contact with them, and from there, I raced with them for quite a while. Had some decent success, in particular in the VLN races at the Nordschleife. And that's sort of where I really started to make my mark and, get my I rating up, start racing against some good names and get featured on broadcasts. And then halfway through 2018, some things at Evolution Racing Team weren't particularly working out. So myself, Simon Feigl, and Zach Hanlon, mostly Simon Feigl, but me and Zach to a degree as well, sort of split off and created our own team, which became Altus Esports. And from there, we've had some ridiculous success.
Yeah, it's been strength to strength for Altus. But let's jump back then, because you mentioned jumping into F1 in 2013, I'm guessing, with the release of that game. You didn't jump into iRacing until 2017. How much of this period, the 4 years, were you using a controller? And at what point did you get your first wheel for Gran Turismo?
So I actually had a wheel for quite a while. So I would have had a wheel long before I even had internet to race with. So it would have been for my probably 8th or something birthday. I would have got a not so great wheel. I don't even know what brand it was.
Did it have force feedback? That's the thing.
It did not have. No, it did not. The brake pedal had no resistance whatsoever. If you threw a pin at it, it'd probably go full brake pressure. It was a horrible thing. But I just got addicted to it. I absolutely loved it. And then eventually, being the amazing quality that it was, it completely broke apart. And I got a Logitech Driving Force GT, which was my first proper wheel. And that's around the time I started properly getting into a Gran Turismo as well. And yeah, that was really where I started, learning a lot more. But there was so many things I hadn't learnt to that point. Like I wasn't trail braking at all. I was using way too much steering lock. So the development curve has been very, very long. So for so long, I probably wasn't driving even slightly properly. But it was just something I just kept chipping away at, and I was always, just trying to improve, get slightly faster. So in the Gran Turismo Racing League I was a part of, it actually had essentially 7 splits of a skill level. And in order to get put into one of those splits, you had to do a qualifying lap. And I tried so hard. I probably spent about 6 or 7 hours to put in the fastest lap time I could. And I felt like I'd maximized everything. I thought, that's got to be a world record lap time. No one in the world has gone faster than that lap. And I got my split. I'm like, yes, I'm going to be in the fastest split. And I was in the 3rd slowest split. It was a long way off. So yeah, for me, basically on a wheel, on a proper setup, it was not an easy journey. Basically, there was a lot of learning to be done. And from there, I just tried to keep rising through the ranks of Gran Turismo until in 2015, I managed to get into the World Championship, and which we had on the GT Planet site. It was the GT Planet Endurance Series at the time, and that's where I was racing against the GT Academy guys, and that's where I had my first proper success.
Got it. Well, so you then jump into iRacing in 2017, so 2 years after that initial first success. And I mean, the step up into World Championship competition iRacing doesn't take too long. In 2018, you take part in your first ever World Championship race, the I don't know if I'm allowed to say the sponsor anymore, so I'm going to refrain, but the GT World Championship, as it was back then.
Definitely not for that one. Yeah,
yes,
definitely not for that one.
We will hold back. We'll call it the GT World Championship, but it must have been quite fun then. You talk about needing a lot of improvement. I'm guessing a lot of that happened in your Gran Turismo days, and then a lot of what you had to do in that subsequent year between joining iRacing and jumping into World Championship competitions was with the help of the Evolution Racing Team, getting used to some of the individual peculiarities of iRacing and some of the unique things you have to do that work in iRacing versus other simulators?
Absolutely. I'll go back a little bit earlier as well to when I was first starting on iRacing as well. I remember training for the 2017 that I was training for the Le Mans 24 Hours, and it was in the GT2 Ford at the time, and I was working with Tim Ryan, and at one point I'm like, oh, where am I, losing time? And he says, oh, you're not trail braking enough. And I had to go, what's trail braking? So there was so many things I didn't know. And absolutely, Evolution Racing Team helped me out a ton. So when I first joined Evolution Racing Team, I was put into a program called the Hornets, which was literally just the development side of Evolution Racing Team. And I learned so much from them. In late 2017, we had the pro qualifiers for the unnamed GT series. And with that, I was paired up with Elliot Biddle and Simone Maria Marcheno. And Simone was by far my biggest confidence booster teammate ever. He was so supportive, super nice guy, ridiculously passionate Italian, of course. And he used to just sit down with me and really help me with driving style. And I learned so much from him. It was brilliant. So when I did get to my first World Championship race, which was slightly unplanned at Sebring, so it was supposed to be my teammate Elliot Biddle and Simone driving for that race. And then about 3 days before race day, Elliot had to pull out, and I was just thrown in at the moment. So at that time, I had not even been on iRacing for a year. I was, I think, 3 weeks out from being on iRacing for a year, and I was going to be on the grid for a World Championship Series race. It was a massive learning curve. I learned a lot in that race, but we sadly completely baffled our fuel numbers, and I couldn't show my true pace. It was a big fuel save to the end, but I believe we came 26th or around that area in that first race at Sebring. And yeah, that was a real shock to the system for me to be in that competition. Having watched, like I mentioned, Gregor Hutu, Mitchell de Jong, so many of those really big drivers at the time, and then out of nowhere, they're on my relative. It was a big shock, and it took me a while to really stop idolizing the drivers in many ways, because I remember that there was one point where I had a Coanda car behind me, and instead of, where's my brake marker, where's my turn-in point, what gear, how's the grip level, how's the fuel numbers, I was, in my head, that's a Coanda car behind me, and I was so petrified that there was, a Coanda car behind me. It was like almost too much for me, and I made a silly mistake and let them overtake me. So there was a big period there where I had to learn to stop idolizing teams and just think they're another driver, 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 eyes, same as me. So that was probably one of the biggest things I had to learn as well, was to sort of just respect everyone on track as equals and no one was superior. And once I got that, I learned a lot as well. And Simone was always super helpful. And we did continue on to do the World Championship race at Monza as well. And that was the first time I ever put over 30 hours of practice into a race. And that was the level Simone was pushing me. He always mentions hell training and getting the most out of your performance by doing such large amounts of practice. So we did that, and our car got taken out in the first corner of the first lap. So that was my first heartbreak in iRacing in the World Championship level. But yeah, I think if there's anyone I have to thank for my performance and speeding up my development curve in iRacing, it's absolutely Simone.
It's surprising hearing you mention the sort of how starstruck you were, I suppose is the word, seeing a VRS kind of sim sport car in your wing mirrors or in your rear view on relative. Do you think that's a common thing for new drivers to some of the World Championships? Do they kind of get a little bit scared that they're racing amongst drivers that they've perhaps watched on broadcast for so many years, or do you think that's just a thing that happened to you and doesn't happen to anyone else?
I'm sure it does happen to other people. I suppose it depends how long you've been watching sim racing for. So all through 2015 and 16, where I was still on Gran Turismo and dabbling on some other sims as well, it was always iRacing that I wanted to go to, but I didn't have the money for a PC, for a subscription and all that, so I was just saving up at the time. But I was watching all the World Championship broadcasts. I was watching the unnamed GT series, the iRacing World Championship Grand Prix series as well. And I just sort of begun to recognize those big drivers, a Gregor Hoots or Mitchell de Jong. Marty Piatella was a driver I like to follow as well, simply because I like his helmet design. So I think it does happen to other drivers as well. It's sort of how you deal with that. So for me, obviously, there was a point where I was Starstruck, getting distracted by them, and it was very much imposter syndrome. It felt like I didn't deserve to be on the grid alongside such names. And I'll be honest, like, that affected me for a long, long time. And it wasn't really until probably maybe a year ago now where I really started to improve on that and get better. And leading up into the iRacing Rallycross Championship that I'm competing in this season, all my friends and everyone I spoke to quite regularly and teammates, they're always like, "Oh, Beau, it's a fight for second place. Mitchell de Jong, he's so good. He does everything. Mitchell's just gonna win everything." And that was sort of the first time I was really able to turn that from Mitchell's better than me, he's so good, how do I beat Mitchell? It's not happening, to I want to prove you wrong. I actually want to, I put in the extra work, not because I wanted to do my own performance, but I wanted to beat Mitchell de Jong. So one of my teammates, Carl Sampson, who I work with on the rallycross side of things, I remember about 2 days before the first round at Hell, he basically just said, do as well as you can, try and match Mitchell, and if you are, within 5 seconds of Mitchell, I think you've done a fantastic job. And there was this fantastic moment at the end of lap 10. I took my Joker and I came out ahead of Mitchell de Jong. So for me, that was like a big moment. It was like, that's for the critics. That's for everyone that said Mitchell was so much better. And then I made contact and went on the fence. So I tried to prove a point. Didn't quite work that time, but that was sort of the moment where I was able to turn from idolizing drivers around me and to really start pushing and using that as motivation to improve my own performance.
Well, there we go. Iona, of course, hero to zero moment, I suppose, in that one. Just have to take a break after that, but yeah, absolutely. I'll just let you continue on.
Yeah, I'm also laughing, by the way, Beau, because your team manager Simon Feigl has jumped into our YouTube chat, just thanking you as well for letting him buy in that GT World Championship race.
That guy, I tell you.
But let's move on to you as a driver, because I think the one thing that is unique about you in some ways is that while you're not necessarily someone like a Mitchell de Jong or Bobby Zalenski who's trying to compete in 3 world championships at the same time, which is just utterly ridiculous in and of itself.
No, thank you.
No. Exactly. No, thank you. But the one thing that you do like to do is mix it up a little bit. You're competing in the Rallycross World Championship. You like your endurance racing. It wasn't just that GT World Championship. You've won top split events in the 24 Hours of Daytona is the one that I'm thinking of. You've also tried to qualify for the Porsche Esports Super Cup. You mentioned it before as well. You like the VLN series, the Nordschleife, one of your favorite tracks, just like it is mine. But what do you think is one of the things that has helped you in terms of your curiosity, especially, is because iRacing has so many different options, but like we say, you can go and be a Bobby Zalenski and a Mitchell de Jong. It just takes you, hours and hours every week to go and put the practice in, figure out what's happening. What are some of the things that you've been finding that as you jump between different things in different periods of times, as naturally you just move from different series to series, what are some of the things that you find yourself doing to get up to speed quickly and really diving into the intricacies of all of these cars?
It's just got to be making sure you're getting the laps in and making sure that you discover these little quirks, and you can't do that without trying the cars at all kinds of different circuits. So when jumping from series to series, for me, it's always a good idea to get into know the car that you want to be in. So when I tried for Porsche Pro Qualifying, it was a bit of a late decision for me to try for Porsche Pro Qualifying. I jump into that car, drive it as many different circuits as you can, and just sort of learn, where's the car want to rotate? Where's the car, is it edgy on brakes at this corner and that corner? Why is it maybe unsettled at this corner but not that corner? Just really trying to exploit the limits of the car and learning, how to make it work more than anything. So I'm not fantastic with setups by any means, so I do lean on my teammates a little bit for that. But from a driving perspective, it's really just making sure that you maximize your knowledge of the car as a whole, because what I think some drivers do is when going into a championship, they'll focus so much on round one and focus on that one car, one track combination, and then it sort of leaves them in a situation where they know what the car is going to do on that one circuit, but not for others. So for me, it's really, at first, get yourself into a bunch of different scenarios with the car and just figure out what makes it work, what doesn't, and if you can make it do anything weird as well. And if you can make it do anything weird, why does it do that? And try and use that to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And just revisiting a topic just a little bit earlier on about, different drivers. There's a question from the Twitch chat from Fraser Racing. I'm assuming that's Fraser Williamson from, not even that Simster anymore. He's as part of a completely different outfit this time. But he says, speaking of thinking about other drivers, what about learning which drivers to trust in iRacing? Do you get happy when there's someone you can trust is racing you? So you can kind of extend that to, do you treat other drivers very differently depending on their history, or do you race everyone the same?
No, so I always sort of go into a battle with someone I've never raced with before. I treat them with the maximum amount of respect. Try not to make contact and, be as respectful as I can. But if something goes wrong or there's an altercation or something, I do remember that for next time. And I do make sure I adapt and race other people differently. So for me, basically, it's learn who you can race and who you can't race, and then try and use that to your advantage as well. So there's a few drivers in the World Championship for Rallycross at the moment who I know I can go side by side for 2 laps in a row, no issue, will never touch door mirrors. And then there's also other drivers who I know if I go within 50 meters of them, I'm getting a 4X. So for me, it really is just being able to know who you can race and who you can't. And absolutely, if there's someone that's, made contact with me to get past me many, many times, and I'm behind them trying to make a pass on them this time around, I will race people how they race me. And, if they squeeze me out in a previous race, I'll squeeze them back. I'm very much, it's not the best thing, and I'll, of course, never intentionally wreck anyone or anything of the like. But I also do believe in tit for tat, basically. So, I don't think you should ever, if someone, for example, forces you off the road and you let them do that 3 races in a row, they're going to keep doing it unless you do something back. So I think it is important to stand your ground and also make other drivers respect you and make sure you're not a pushover, because, there's been times, I remember we had a series in Australia called the Sprint Series Australasia, and at one point there was this really quick driver. His name was Josh Rogers, or I don't know it. And he started in last, and he was trying to do a bit of a last to first challenge, and he is very, very fast. I'll give him that. And he caught me, and there were so many drivers that just moved to the side, let Rogers through, and made life easy for him. And I don't like that. I don't like, because you think someone's better than you or faster, or whatever, that you just let them by. I don't like that. So I put up a fight with Rogers. I lost the fight, of course, but it's important, I think, to stand your ground, know who you can race with, but at the same time, never make yourself a pushover, because the top drivers will always take advantage of that.
And I think that's a great way to put it. And you look at taking this into the real world, just for an example, you look at F1 and the most recent race that we had at Portimao, and that fantastic battle that you had between Kimi Räikkönen and Carlos Sainz. That's only going to work between 2 drivers who know that they can trust each other. You talk about some of the other incidents we saw at that race, right? It's about knowing the limits and trusting that the other car is going to leave you enough space to be able to continue on the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things is, especially when you come into the late stages of a race and, you're fighting for a win or something, knowing your opponent and being able to trust them and being able to know, if I go for a bit of a risky move here, that I'm going to have space given to me. I'm going to, be given the utmost respect, and we can have a clean fight in this battle. it just drives your confidence, and it also allows you to put on a better show for everyone watching as well. So, absolutely, it drives your confidence. Being able to trust the drivers around you is always good. But it's also those moments where you don't trust the other drivers around you, where it gets a bit dicey, and you do see some clumsy incidents sometimes. So that's why I think always the first time you encounter a driver, give them the utmost respect, and go from there. And like I said, there's drivers like in the Rallycross Championship, Johan Harth. We've had many fights in rookie Rallycross. We can go side by side, no issues. And when you get those moments where you do have someone you can trust on track, there's not going to be any issues because you're both going to give the same amount of room. It's fantastic. And that's why I think so many of us love sim racing, is have those battles and have that moment where you're on track with someone. It can go wrong at any moment, and it doesn't, because you both look after each other.
Well, Beau, I think you very eloquently put that. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to move on from talking about your background to talking about some more topics in sim racing and how we can continue to make sim racing bigger. Because while you're a competitor, you are also a content creator. You have a YouTube and Twitch channel. You've stopped streaming as much as I would have liked. You used to stream a lot more. You also stopped putting out as many YouTube videos. I think a certain World Championship competition has got in the way a little bit.
Just a little bit. So there were so many plans, because sadly due to COVID-19, I was put in a difficult spot with my job. So I sadly don't have a job anymore. So I'm just got a lot of free time on my hands. And at first the thought was, okay, let's really dig into, Twitch. We'll do a lot of that. We'll dig into a YouTube and put out some videos, try and get one out every 2 days. And then I qualified for the World Championship. And it's like, well, you don't get many opportunities at World Championship. And from a completely honest perspective, I don't think I'm good enough for an oval series to make it into a World Championship there, or a road series. So for me, really, it was just Rallycross that I thought, okay, this is something I believe I can still cut at the very top level. I believe, I've got a chance to actually fight for the championship, perhaps. So with making that championship, absolutely, I put everything on the back burner, and sadly, no YouTube content or Twitch or anything. But if I'm going to make a little bit of a plug, once the World Championship is over, absolutely plenty more content to come.
Yeah, a little plug there. You can see on the screen as well. You can go and follow him on Twitter, BeauAlbert06. You'll get more up-to-date notifications as things change. But the reason we wanted to kind of have a little bit of a round table here is, as a content creator, you often have some strong views on various things in sim racing. And there was an article this past week on overtake.gg about what sim racing broadcasts can be doing better to try and attract new audiences and more engaged audience to watch the events that we're putting on. And it's not just sim racing broadcasting. I think the content creation community can do its own part as well. Obviously, the regular community has a whole big part to play in getting people onboarded into the community, keeping them as a part of the community. But Connery, let's kick this off with you first, because I know this is something that you're very, very passionate about. Sim racing broadcasting, let's start there. There's a number of things that we can do better. Production value, for example, which would be very nice for us to do big events like we see the likes of ESL and Blast in other esports doing. It's just, unfortunately, at least here at RaceSpot TV, often we have one producer and then two commentators working on an event, and it becomes tough for us to really step up to the levels that we want to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to the budget. Of course, those companies that you mentioned in other esports, they've been a bit flush with cash because of a lot of venture capital funding. So it does mean that they can put a lot more money and a lot more time and effort and manpower behind everything, and they don't have the situation where a lot of our producers have, where they have full-time jobs on the side and having to do this as well and try and make the production value of this also up to a level where people won't notice that it's bad. It's probably the thing there. But yeah, I think personally we do probably the best that we can do given our resources. But there's always room for improvement, of course. As far as the specific technology that's required, a lot of other esports are doing a lot of augmented reality stuff right now, which would be very useful to have when we actually go back to having live events and things like that. But Right now, I think we're probably at the best that we've ever have been, and that's not just talking about Racebot. This is talking about all the other broadcasting companies as well, because I know GSRC do a decent job at their stuff, and Podium for the oval broadcast as well. Even iRacing, their in-house productions have gotten better recently. They're still not absolutely perfect, at least in my view, but they've gotten better. So I think it just, we're kind of just relying on everyone to just sort of do their bit and pull up the production value. But right now, there's probably not a lot more that we can do without having to make this people's full-time jobs.
Well, I think that's a fair way of putting it. But Beau, you've had some opportunities to work with SimSpeed TV and do some broadcasts for them.
That's one I forgot. There we go. I knew I was forgetting one.
I was waiting for it to be mentioned. I'm like, when's it coming, Connery?
Yeah, sorry. I had one in mind. I was like, I can't remember. No.
I was about to call you out for that one. SimSpeed do a great job at time slots that we often cannot make work for us at all. But Beau, you have done some work for them. And the one thing that I think you might have a unique perspective on is that you are in Australia, where you have the Supercars E Series, not just the one that we saw this past summer with the real-life drivers, but the virtual drivers as well, the best sim racers going to compete with these real organizations. And that's put on TV in Australia, and for people outside the country, they can watch that on YouTube. And that has one of the highest production values that I've ever seen on any broadcast. And that's all made possible by a lot of the tools that we use as well. And so while there are stuff that we want to take from those broadcasts, from your perspective as a viewer and someone who's worked on the broadcast side as well, do you see broadcasts like these and really think about how, I'm trying to put this in the right way, think about how it's becoming closer, and we're inching closer to really making people feel connected to these events the same way that they do about some of these iconic motor races?
I think one of the biggest things, especially when you look at the Supercars E Series, and it has obviously been done by iRacing in-house as well, in particular with the Coke Series. I think the thing that really makes the broadcasts sort of, especially production value, that little bit better is being able to engage with the drivers as well, and being able to see them, I think, is one thing that really sort of adds to the broadcast and really makes it. Of course, having the live production crew is fantastic. Being able to see the commentators in one spot and having a beautiful backdrop set is fantastic. But I quite like the point of being able to form that connection with the drivers, because for so long, I mentioned, for so long before I was even on iRacing, I was watching the World Championship broadcasts. There was still this disconnect between who the drivers were, their backgrounds, where they're from, who are the drivers behind the cars? Because it's easy to look at iRacing and just see it as a car race. You don't think of it as, a competition between people, on an even platform. It becomes about the cars more than anything. So I think when you look at the Supercars E Series, what really steps that up, with the Coke Series as well, is actually being able to make that connection with the drivers, see their face, what equipment are they using. And also with the Supercars E Series, they do interviews with some of the drivers in between races as well. And being able to relate to that driver just adds so much, in my opinion, to a broadcast.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and you just got to look not just to Supercars E Series, but you also have a lot of the driver views from DTM Esports, ADAC, GT Masters as well. It's all incorporated. At least as far as iRacing is concerned, there are a lot of drivers that are seemingly kind of reluctant to because of resource usage or things like that. They don't want to be streaming their feeds, internet issues and things like that. But it's certainly something that I would like to see more of. It's just about getting everyone organized, I suppose, because there's multiple ways to do it. You can just add everyone to a Zoom call. I've seen that happen. That's how they do it on the NASCAR broadcasts. They just add everyone to a Zoom call and they just pull it. They just pull it as required. But yeah, I completely agree with you there. The sort of connection there allows you to, like I said, humanize the drivers. Also, it helps brand the drivers as well, and the drivers got to put an effort themselves as well to really brand and market their own stuff. They can't just be turning up to some of the pest races, just drive around for about an hour and then go home. That's not how you do things. You got to really promote yourself outside of the broadcasts as well. But anything we can do in broadcast to help that is also very, very beneficial. I'm just reminded back to that again, DTM Esports broadcast. We had the final of it very recently, and I just can't get out of my head the moment coming across the line when Moritz Rona won the championship. Yeah. Where he was just punching the air, and he just kind of like, for a moment, he kind of held his head in his hands like that, and I just thought, oh, wow, that's a very pivotal, emotional moment that a lot of people can connect with, and it really makes it mean a lot more.
And it's something you can put onto, a sim racing highlight reel, isn't it? Because when you used to just have, sim racing highlights, it was always the cars, it was always, who's winning the race or whatever. Having that camera on the drivers, seeing the emotions, seeing what's going through their mind at that point when, Moritz Rona wins a DTM championship on Race Room, that is fantastic. And that's the stuff that, you can really push sim racing as a sport, commercially and, market that. It just sells the point where you've got the emotion behind it. And I think back to Jimmy Broadbent when he won the Le Mans 24 Hours. He said a brilliant quote that I'll always love, and that was, the racing is not real. It's virtual. It's fake. But the emotions are very real.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about webcams, I mean, Hugo and our producer has commented in our TeamSpeak room, we still struggle to get drivers to commit to doing them. But a specific moment I think about was the eNASCAR Coca-Cola finale last time around, live on NBCSN. You got to see the emotions of Zach Novak as he comes across the line, his family coming into the room as well. And another indication, or rather example of this is we've been doing a Beau for the Porsche Esports Super Cup. We've been doing a stream for Coanda with a lot of their webcams, and I saw the moment when Josh Rogers had that incident at Monza, which effectively wiped away any chances of the title. You could see that emotion on his face. And I think this is something that, even if we can't do this on the broadcast side, this is when maybe teams start to be able to do this. We have Coanda do this. The Apex Racing team has started to do these team streams as well. And you talk about promoting yourself as well. One thing that I mentioned before, you this past weekend, you were tweeting that you were watching the IndyCar race with the Andretti team. That's the kind of engagement that often drives people to learn about you as a person a little bit more.
Absolutely. And that's sort of one thing I think, especially in Australia, not many drivers do. And that's sort of how I wanted to develop myself as well. So not only, obviously, am I trying to improve myself as a driver all the time, but also how can I improve my presence? So I've got a very active Facebook page. I keep that as up to date as I can. I'm on Twitter very regularly. I try and do YouTube videos as much as I can. And I try and sort of get the word out as much as I can and really market myself and put myself out there. And I think because I've been able to market myself, be active and keep that consistent, it's actually put me in some very good positions where I otherwise wouldn't have been. So there's been times where, if I'm negotiating something with a team or something, I'm actually able to sort of, push that. I have that presence behind me. I've got more eyes. I've got more exposure or whatever. And I can, get better results for myself just because of that. Also, just in terms of streaming as well, just getting, that marketing, being able to promote yourself as a person, I think actually goes quite a long way. So that's one thing I'm always focusing on, is that, yes, I'm not the fastest driver, but I try and also be the most sponsor friendly. And I think that's one thing I'd like to see more from sim racing drivers as well, because especially when you think of the very, very top drivers in sim racing, so like Josh Rogers, Max Benecke, Seb Job, they're slowly becoming more and more active with their social media, which I think is fantastic. They're able to brand themselves better that way. But I think there's still a lot of drivers out there with a very low presence on social media. And I think actually long term, they're probably hurting themselves by not pushing social media more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Iona's got to transition over to manual focus instead of autofocus, since it's going a little bit crazy. But yeah, I absolutely agree with that as well. Again, I hate to beat the dead horse, but I always like to make these comparisons to other esports, which is what the article on Novatech GG did, with sort of seeing what we can learn from people who've done it before, other esports, other games that have done this sort of thing before. And one thing I absolutely love about those sorts of high production value broadcasts are the sort of filler content, shall we say, during the broadcasts, where you have those segments. You have the driver biographies, for example, where they just sit the driver down and just talk about stuff, and they can, talk about their history, just like what we've done with you here on the podcast, but make it a little bit more short form, just to fit inside a couple of minutes, and just play that before a race or something like that. That would just add so much more. But then again, it's just like, it's so much more manpower and so much more time that needs to be required to try and produce that content, and we just kind of got to strike a balance between something being economically viable and something that's going to be insane for the production value. So it's a sort of difficult line to try and difficult balance to strike, but I mean, we're getting closer and closer to it, and I'm hoping to do, if there's an opportunity to do more content like that, then I would certainly be up for it. And again, it will just make what we do so much more engaging.
Yeah, and Beau, you're part of the World Championship for Rallycross. One thing that we were trying to do in those first 2 rounds was in between the All-Star and the main race, I talked to both the first 2 winners, Joni Ollikainen and Ilari Lemonsivu, and we did a short interview with them and we played that. So we're trying to do more of these things, but let's pivot a little bit here. We've been talking about on the broadcast side, on the content creation side, Beau. It's something that you obviously after this season are going to be diving back into. We see the likes of Jimmy Broadbent, Chris Hayes. There's lots of these sim racing content creators, both on YouTube. You've then got the streamers on Twitch. You've got big streamers like Quirk. I'm going to name Dan Suzuki, all sorts of people who are now streaming to 500 plus people. What can some of these people do to try and continue to grow sim racing? Because I think the one thing that I often see with some of these sim racers is they sort of form these little clique of communities. And once you kind of find a streamer, you very much get ingratiated into their community. How can we maybe do a bit of a better job of exposing a lot of these people to a broader world of sim racing, if you will?
So especially from a sim racing esports side of things, I think definitely, I think it's almost underrepresented. That's not a very good word at all. I think I've made that up. At the moment, when you look at the likes of Jimmy Broadbent, Chris Hay, Dan Suzuki, all those streamers and content creators really pushing numbers on YouTube, and that, none of them are particularly focusing on sim racing esports as such. I think the Formula One community, especially with their esports program, is probably doing the best job of that, of really incorporating esports into the mainstream content creation. But when you think of iRacing right now in particular, none of those real top drivers are really focusing on the esports world. So when there's a new, car content, a new build for iRacing, everyone flocks and makes videos on that. But when there's a new round of the Porsche Esports Super Cup or, the Coke Finale, we don't really have that online presence as such on content being made for that. There's no, as such, discussion channels talking about all the sim racing events. There's no, apart from, what iRacing themselves do, there's no highlights. There's no behind the scenes from teams, on how they prepared or anything of that such. There's no real content beyond what iRacing and the streaming service puts out themselves. So what I would like to see is more just content from the teams themselves. How are they preparing for an event? What's going on through their race? And how do we actually eventually get sim racing esports more personal again, with the fact that at the moment, all the YouTube content is not about esports at all. It's purely about the games and all of that. There's nothing, learning about the drivers. There's nothing learning about the teams and what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think it's important you mentioned content there, because there's a lot of these brands, and we should use the word brands now in esports, because it's not just about being a team. It's about selling yourself and making content. And in the case of some of the esports organizations and other esports like Counter-Strike, you've got, vlogs that a lot of the team members are doing and stuff like that. You talk about incorporating esports as a content creator, though, and one thing that you were doing that I really enjoyed, and one thing that I hope you'll get back to next year, is the recap videos of the Porsche Super Cup, because there's so much action that happens in these races. Yeah. You've got 2 hours of broadcast, you've got the qualifying, you've got 2 races. and 40 drivers. And the one thing that becomes very hard, and Connery can attest to here on a broadcast, is telling every single story that is taking place. And now your videos are an opportunity to dive down a little bit more into them. Can you explain exactly how long it takes you to do each of those videos and why it's such a involved process? Because I saw some of the work that you were doing. It takes you a lot of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I really wanted to, so like I mentioned in my last little rant before, was I wanted more content focusing on, you know, the esports stories. So not just sim racing and the new content and everything comes out, but what are the esports series, the top level things that are really going on? So I wanted to come up with these highlight packages because at the time I noticed iRacing weren't doing any highlights or anything. So I saw an opportunity there to try and fill that gap and make some content. So what I would do was, while I was watching the broadcast, was literally had a spreadsheet open. I was making notes on lap 4, Sebastian Job around the outside of Graham Carroll at turn number 1, and a little timestamp. And I would do that for both the sprint or qualifying sprint race and feature race. And then from there, I would save the iRacing replay because I was spectating at the time. Save the replay, and I would start trying to form a highlight package. And in many ways, I wanted to condense it down to 15 minutes and just create like a really extended but thorough highlights package, but also with a cinematic flair that people could really engage with. And I think overall, the response was very, very good. I think a lot of people were very happy with it. But in terms of view numbers, it wasn't particularly beneficial for my channel. So I was doing some other content, the generic stuff as such. So top 5 cars you should buy in iRacing, and they were getting very good views. And all the sim racing stuff was sadly lacking in views. So these videos I'd fill out a spreadsheet, go through all the replays, make sure I haven't missed anything, script a video, say out my script, record all that, edit the footage. That was about 25 to 30 hours of work, so it was a multiple day process, and it was only getting 400 to 500 views. So while that is, you know, it's a lot of people, and I do appreciate everyone watching that, for the time commitment, it was a massive slog for the end result. So sadly, I only did 3 rounds of coverage of that. But I was also talking to some people behind the scenes about actually doing it as a bit more of a serious thing, but sadly never came to fruition with a bunch of other factors that came into it. But that's the sort of content I really want to see more of, is the content diving in and explaining what's going on in the sim racing events as well. And another video that did get me into a little bit of hot water, I got an interesting message from some iRacing staff after it. Was there was an incident in the pro qualifying series for Porsches last season, where at one point, let's not get into who did what to who and everything, but about 25 of 30 drivers at the top of the series were all banned and excluded from the series. And I made a video explaining to the regular person who may not be involved in the Porsche Esports Super Cup, they're not watching it particularly, I explained the situation, what was going on, how it affects everyone, and that video actually did very, very well. And that was the first time I really saw people who were not involved in or didn't really care for esports racing as a whole get engaged in an esports racing topic. And that's the content I want to see more of, is, you know, talking about, you know, the bad moments, the good moments, and sort of explaining the world of esports that, you know, all of us 3 deal with every single day.
I think the point about that is, like, drama kind of sells.
Yes.
In a way. Drama
Yes.
definitely sells. And you can leverage that. You can definitely leverage that. If you're iRacing trying to, they sometimes do these recaps, but they're only like 2 minutes long, which is kind of a bit embarrassing, I think.
30 seconds for a rallycross.
Yeah. So hopefully, you know, they'll be able to incorporate that. But of course, the other issue comes, at least as far as iRacing and even some other tournament organizers are concerned, is that you of course brought the topic of the bans, but we've also got in PESC a lot of the time the penalties aren't even made public. Like,
yes,
we're having to say in the broadcast, like, oh, that'll be investigated after the race, and then we'll know by Monday whether or not they'll get a penalty. And even then, we sometimes don't get the information. So it's kind of like there's a lot of work to do, at least from a tournament organization side as well, to be able to help out those stories, because sometimes we see a driver not take part in qualifying, and we thought, oh, has he had like both of his laps invalidated or something like that? But no, it's because he had a qualifying ban. And I'm like, we just didn't get that information. So if we don't have it, then what hope of the viewers do they have to be able to understand what's going on? But yeah, it's an absolutely fantastic point. You got to really leverage the highs and, of course, the lows as well, the drama. I'd like to see more communication from a lot of tournament organizers when it comes to that, instead of just leaving everyone guessing and leaving everything to these private channels with the drivers. Just make a public statement. Make the viewers know, let the viewers know what's going on, because otherwise they're not going to be engaged with what's going on. But before I go off with a whole entire rant about that subject, I should leave the stage to Iona, because I don't know. Do you have any views on this, or am I being crazy?
I actually agree with you, and Hugo can tell you this. Before I joined RaceSpot, I run a league of my own called Winter VLN, and I told Hugo, is there a way I can directly send to your graphics overlay the penalties as they happen, so you don't have to worry about that? I think everything should be reported, and it becomes difficult if you're not telling again, sim racing is about telling stories, and if you don't have all the details there, you're telling an incomplete story, and it's hard for teams to understand. But it's a hard one. I kind of understand sometimes why you want to restrict the information, and one thing that we did want to talk about a little bit, and I guess a good transition now, is a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago now, it feels like time's flying in the winter, but there was a little bit of a cheating scandal surrounding iRacing. There was a Twitter account that came out claiming to have some hacks. There was a user, in fact, suspended for having hacks, and it's been a very secretive process in many ways. iRacing deleting threads on the forum talking about this issue. Beau, from your perspective, this is something that I think does concern newer fans of iRacing, people who haven't maybe been around the community for so long. They see something like this and they get worried that it's a prevalent thing. What's your thoughts on it, and how would you have approached it differently maybe if you were iRacing?
It's a difficult one from an iRacing perspective, because of course when people are talking about cheating, it's a bad look on your product regardless of what light you try and put it in. So for iRacing, I do understand from one side them trying to minimize the prevalence and everyone reading about it and such. But when you start deleting forums and threads, it also begs a lot of questions as well. And I in the World Championship forum, when all of this was going on, I privately asked Tyler, what steps are being made to prevent, cheating in the World Championships, because, I don't believe anyone is cheating in an iRacing World Championship. But with the Callum Cross, I believe it was, cheating scandal, he said that he knows of pros that are using it. And of course, we'd all like to think that, hey, there's no cheating in the Pro Series. How do you actually know? So it's one of those things. So for me, I asked Tyler if it was possible, because right now how it works in the World Championships is select drivers at select rounds are chosen to submit their telemetry for fact checking and making sure there's no inconsistencies. I sort of just put forward the argument, how feasible is it to have everybody at every round checked just for complete transparency? Basically, that was shut down, saying it does take a lot of time. I don't know the process behind it, so absolutely maybe that is something that happens. But it would have been nice, I think, instead of having it be a discussion that only I could get an answer through the private forums, it would have been nice to see iRacing issue a statement and really say, look, there was or was not an incident involving, a driver cheating. We're looking into it. And I think if they would have publicly said, hey, we're looking into it, it would have settled a lot of, people's doubts and questions about the platform and such. But sadly, it's all kind of been swept under a rug to minimize the publicity of it. But by sweeping it under the rug, I think they've just created more publicity for it.
I think would understand this coming from a computer science background, but it's like security by obscurity. As long as people aren't talking about it, you're hoping that that's a security measure. But that's just not going to work because, the Streisand effect comes in full force. Because you're trying to stop people from talking about it, that gets people to talk about it more. So it's definitely not the right way to go about things. I have my own problem with the whole forum moderation situation there, but that's probably a topic for another time. But again, it's like I said, communication. You got to treat your viewers, customers, whatever, like they have some form of intelligence. You can't just like say, "Oh, nothing's happening. We'll sort this all out privately," and that's not the sort of image that you want to put across. I don't think you want to make it seem like you're absolutely proactive, and you want to make it at least seem like you are completely on top of things. For that Callum Cross situation, as soon as those videos came out, iRacing could have instantly released a statement saying, "Oh, it's something we are investigating, and just and the user in question has been suspended." I know there's some limitations on what they can talk about with suspensions and things like that, but it's again, there needs to be a lot more communication. It can't just be handled silently, and then everyone's like, "Oh, everything is okay now, I suppose." Because the more you let these rumors and speculation run rampant, the more out of control they're going to be when it comes to damage control when it really does hit the fan.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the interesting thing about the Callum Cross incident, right, is when you remove all of these threads, all of the discussion, like you say, Connery, it just goes into private channels, and then
it goes to Twitter, it goes to Discord,
Exactly.
it goes everywhere else. So I mean, they can defend their own turf, however they want. There's nothing stopping them from doing so. But I'm just thinking about the optics of the whole situation.
Yeah, and Beau, from your perspective, you talk about talking to one of the race directors, if you will, trying to understand at the World Championship level. How much does this concern you? I mean, yes, I think it's fair that a lot of the names in all of the World Championship have been there for many years, or have been part of organizations where you have, to some degree, have just that trust that they're probably not doing anything. But in an esport, money's on the line. Connery, you can attest to this. In other esports, there are always cheating situations. This is not something that's it's not going to be a once and done for iRacing. This is something that, as the money continues to come in, is going to be increasingly frequent.
Yeah.
How concerned do you get about it?
Well, I'll probably answer first, as I'm on this train and I'm not getting
Go
off
for
right
it
now. But
Choo-choo.
But choo-choo. We're leaving the station and we have no brakes. But but yeah, I mean, like you said it perfectly, Ayuna. The more popular sim racing is going to get, the more this is going to be a problem. It's a massive problem in Counter-Strike with your regular matchmaking. Even in the tournament scene, there's been the coach bug abuse, where the coach connected to the server could basically get himself frozen in one spot, and he had free reign to look around the map, which like a regular spectator, and that gives so much information away, and there's no way the players didn't know about that because there's information being relayed. And even deeper in Counter-Strike's history, the famous Forsaken incident, the Counter-Strike player from India who has managed to be able to hack at a LAN event, which requires a special kind of skill. Because he had disguised his hacking program as Word.exe, which is a pretty a pretty funny thing. Yeah, exactly. Because there's footage of it, that an admin sort of was a bit suspicious because he was starting to lock onto people's heads. So he went over to his PC and you could just see that he was trying to hide it, and then he just had to be kind of pulled away from his PC. Yeah. So if it's a problem that much in other esports, it's going to be a problem in sim racing. And I know iRacing uses easy anti-cheat, which is not the best, I don't think. A lot of hackers, they make decent money out of doing what they do, especially in Counter-Strike, where the market for undetectable by VAC, which is Valve's cheating system, anti-cheat system, is absolutely huge. There's subscription models for cheats, so it's a massive problem. And once there's the reason to do it in things like iRacing, Race Room, etc. Course, or whatever, those hackers are going to be like, oh, there's maybe a bit of money to be made here, trying to circumvent these anti-cheats. And easy anti-cheat's probably one of the weaker ones, because you think back to look at some of the other developers trying to combat cheating. Valorant basically has a rootkit installed on your PC that boots up when you boot up your PC before your OS even loads, before Windows even has a chance to load. So, you know, that's the brute force method they've gone for, and some people have said it's basically spyware. But at this point, you kind of have to do that to make sure your competition is completely fair. So I don't know. iRacing is a tricky sport, and it's a very complicated subject to get into. And like you said, Beau, I don't think anyone at the top level of iRacing is cheating at the moment. But over the next few years, we probably might see a couple of suspicions. I don't know where they would come from, but again, it's up to iRacing to actively try and put something in before it gets to that point.
Absolutely, and I remember, you know, when we go back to the first season of the Porsche Esports Super Cup, Josh Rogers was dominating everything, and there was actually, I'm not going to mention who messaged me yet, but there was one driver who was so certain that Josh Rogers was cheating, and it was absolutely, he was dead set that this was happening. You know, I sort of rebutted that by saying Josh Rogers still slapped everybody in a LAN event. I don't think he's cheating. But at the same time, for how long in World Championships now have we relied on a trust system? And, you know, in the World Championship, like I said, it's select drivers, select rounds being targeted for telemetry. I've done 4 rounds now of the iRacing Rallycross Championship, and you know, I'm not, obviously. I'm putting myself with a giant question mark over my head now, but if I was cheating, that's 4 rounds I've gone undetected. So I think it's only so long until the trust system that we've got built up in iRacing World Championships is eventually broken. It's going, eventually, like you said, the money that we have in iRacing right now, it recently surpassed over $1 million in prize money. It's getting bigger and bigger. We're getting more and more eyes on us. Someone wants the spotlight. They don't want to work for it. They're going to cheat eventually. It's going to happen. It's not an if, it's when.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off that, we've seen all of these scandals like Connery's talking about. Valorant having a kernel-level driver, I think, is a first in all of esports to try and root out this anti-cheat. But question for both of you guys before we wrap up here, because we've been going for almost 90 minutes. But if I told you I would install a program just like Valorant did, which would be a kernel-level, you know, program that in many ways cannot be... I forget what the technical term here is, Connery, but, you know, cannot be decompiled or anything like this. You know, hypothetically, let's say...
Yeah.
Right, reverse engineered, there we go. Let's say we put out this type of a program that runs at a kernel level, is going to give us some kind of insight into what applications are running on your computer. It's going to have direct access, obviously through telemetry from iRacing, to see your inputs and kind of see what that is and maybe send that up to a server. Beau, let's start with you as the competitor here. Would you be willing to run this on your computer? And can you see any reason that another competitor might not, other than the internet and the stability issues, which are things that drivers have complained about in the past with webcams, but this is something that is more core, more crucial, and comes down to rooting out cheating at the heart of our sport?
Well, I definitely think that if you're in the World Championship level, I think absolutely it needs to be enforced. I think, especially with the prize money that we've got going on and, you know, the amount that's at stake for some of these drivers, like I said, eventually someone's going to try and cheat. So I think if there is a measure that can be taken, albeit extreme, personally, I'm all for it. Is there going to be concerns? Absolutely. Why? You know, is it possible that anyone else is able to access it and then suddenly you can view everyone else's telemetry, get advice on setups? Can you know, see what one driver is doing on X, Y, and Z corner? There's always going to be concerns. There's always going to be somebody who isn't a fan of it. But I really think from a competitor standpoint, you know, for me, I would feel so much safer knowing everyone in the field has the same program. And if you don't run the program, you're not in a World Championship, plain and simple.
I think, yeah, if it's limited to World Championship competitors only, there's absolutely no reason to not run it. I'm just going to say that straight up. The problem, the drama with the whole Valorant situation came where they force it on everyone. So even if you want to play the game, like in any capacity, you have to have it running, which is where all the privacy concerns came out. But But if it's only required for big competitions, big esports events, then I am absolutely 100% all for it, because as a pro driver, you shouldn't have anything to hide. As far as that is concerned, and you can only just run it for the duration of the competition. It's it's not like you're just randomly browsing in the background to some incriminating stuff. But but yeah, for at least iRacing World Championship level competitions, and maybe even open it up to some private leagues with big competitions as well. Then yeah, there's no reason that anyone should have to try and make an excuse not to run it.
Well, it's an idea that I've had now for a few years, not just for anti-cheat purposes, but to enable some other things, maybe like at the Nordschleife, for example. But one of the ideas that I really want to have is a Code 60 implemented, so that without iRacing having that a full Code 60 around the track, you could have different sectors. Only possible if you have those type of programs, but nevertheless. Beau, great to have you. It was great to talk a little bit about your background, and then this little discussion. I wish we could have more of these, because it's been a really fun one. You got three guys who all are part of esports. We live and breathe it in many ways, and I think we have a lot of opinions about how we continue to grow sim racing. So thanks for joining us. And one more round of the World Rallycross Championship starts this weekend. Go back to a track that you visited before the first round of the season. It was a pretty decent result for you, a top 5 finish, I do believe. Hopefully we'll get the similar results this time around, especially with that little bit of change in the track resets that we talked about slightly earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, last time we were at Hell, I was in second place on the last lap. I was so close to the win. Sadly, contacted on the last lap, hit a barrier, ended up in 5th. So, for me, I go into this, it's a bit of a weird one, visiting a track for the second time, because I already know the setup's there. I know the pace is good. So for me, it's just simply try and do the best job I can. I've now got the advantage on, or not the advantage, but I've got the ability to fight for qualifying points now. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully a good result coming to the Gainbridge Andretti Autosport.
Well, good luck. Like we said, that will all be live on the iRacing social medias. But that's going to be it here for another episode then of Talking Tent, a RaceBot TV podcast. Before we go, let's preview another busy weekend of racing action, all live on RaceBot TV and the iRacing Esports Network. This Friday, tune in for one more round of Friday Night Primetime as the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship heads to Laguna Seca for round 7 in its 12-week championship. Then on Saturday, tune in for the H&R 24 Hours of Spa, a special event that we'll be providing uninterrupted coverage of. But alongside that, you can also watch the Sports Car Open. Connery will be on that broadcast, the 4 Hours of Imola. And at the same time, the second round of the Porsche Pro Qualifying Series from the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve. Like we say as well, Saturday, the 5th round of the iRacing Rallycross World Championship presented by Yokohama. And that will wrap up a very busy Saturday before we complete on Sunday that 24-hour event. After the conclusion of the 24 Hours of Spa, you can then check out the season finale of the major series, the California 500 miles in the IndyCar from Fontana. Should be a fun way to end a season of excitement for the major series. Lots of action to catch then on the iRacing Esports Network and RaceBot TV. But for now, my name is Arjuna Kankipati, and for myself, Connery Maddock, and Hugo Luis down in the production room, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.